Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. So we are live, but I'm not sure if anyone is watching. Did you check if the link is working on YouTube, Lisa?
It is working.
Great.
I'm posting it to Patreon now.
I'm meeting a rap live on YouTube.
In 10 minutes.
I got for my birthday. It appears to me, it still appears video unavailable. The video is private.
I think you need to change. It should be. Try this one. I send it here. If you look in the chat now on Zoom, Nicholas. Otherwise, it could be a cache. Maybe you have to do a private window or something. But this is up. This is not private.
Yeah, no, there we are.
Yeah. So we just need to close that down later so we don't create any echo or what. So you keep track if there are questions as well on YouTube later then, or?
Yes, I will do that in the chat. I will just see whatever is posted. Can we record this soon?
Yeah, that's
great.
possible. Let me just check the stream if I also can find it here. I need to close that down later. So I'll do that. And then
there is one person watching now that I think is me.
Record on this computer.
Q&A will start.
One thing I'm going to check here as well. Do we want to do gallery view so we see all of us?
Yes, let's do that.
Or only the one who speaks? Okay. On YouTube, is that working, or is it better to do?
On YouTube, you're still eating.
Yeah. Always. My shadow. What about on YouTube? Is it good with these 3 or 4?
Still not there. I mean, we're live, but probably like a minute after or something. Now we just appear now. And
how is this then look? Wait a second.
It looks good. I'm gonna see. I'm gonna mute myself to see how it sounds.
Yeah. Okay. Strange. So we wait for Alexander, yeah? And,
yes.
Yeah.
Posted links on.
Let's start at 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Okay, I posted links on Patreon, so people should join.
Well, so now since it's public, I'm almost, yeah, but we'll keep it like this. That's good. Yeah, we don't post it on other media. It's good.
Yeah. There is some people connected already. Hello, thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We will wait until 4 to start. And of course, we have to wait for Alexander to connect to that.
Nicholas disappeared, no?
I think he might be there, but just
Blurred.
Blurred. Yeah.
Yeah, my video is blurred. Not
You-
me. Not me.
Okay. You're prepared to make a grand entrance.
No, I was just watching the YouTube 1 minute
Ah,
and seeing how many people were there, and so I had to mute. Otherwise, if I turn it on right now, and if I am mute the YouTube and I'm not muted there, it's going to be chaos.
yeah. Alexander will be there in a few minutes, he says. Are you back, Lisa? You're in Berlin, or where are you?
Yeah, I'm back. I came back on Wednesday. Yeah. So I've been back for 2 days, enjoying the lovely Berlin rainy weather.
Yeah.
There was this this kind of fake announcement of spring and warmth and people on the parks for a week, and then hard back to winter. How cruel is that, giving one hopes?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's like every April, I don't know, I kind of forget every year that it's like this in April, and I'm like, oh, spring is here. And then always a disappointment again. It's snowing.
That's the build-up. I mean, I feel like that's also building up. I mean, there's so many expectations there. I mean, I just love this, I shouldn't say, but I find this to be thrown back and forth quite intriguing on some level as well, I must say. I just love spring, and this is not spring, this is pre-spring. It's just such a ambivalent, wild. I was in the south of Germany, it was like this much snow, I was like, Weihnachten, it was. And then the weekend before, we were 18 degrees in the sun. It's pretty wild. It's not like in Chile.
No, in Chile it's the middle of the. Well, now it's autumn starting, so but there's still 20-something degrees. It's going to be fine until Easter, at least.
We have a new concept. Berlin Psychoanalytic speaks about the weather.
Well, you have to speak about something at the beginning of the. It's like a taxi ride a little bit.
Yeah, the weather report with the Berlin Psychoanalytic.
Yeah, like international weather report.
Starring Alexander Dmitrievich. Hello. No.
Is it better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry that I'm almost late. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
Oh, wait, I'm just trying to unpin. Okay.
Are more people going to join us?
Well, the people who join, they will be joining through YouTube, no, Lisa?
Mm-hmm. So
they
we have
will-
5 people looking now.
Oh, but we won't see them here.
We won't, no.
Oh, okay.
I'm
Okay.
connected by the Berlin Psychoanalytic YouTube account, and that counts like one person. Or if you are also connected from the Berlin Psychoanalytic account to YouTube, will count as 2 people watching.
Yeah, I'm definitely one person through my account, so maybe it's just 4.
We're just watching ourselves. But happily, it's being recorded. We have to work with what we have.
No, I mean, it says 5 people, so it's 4 plus a mystery. Welcome, mystery guest.
It's good to have an audience.
Yeah.
Hopefully not a family member of one of us.
Probably one.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should then just get started with the questions that were sent in beforehand. Or what do you think, Lisa?
I think that's a great idea. Let's do that. So welcome to everyone joining us. I don't know how many you are, but to anyone joining, we're very glad to have you all here. We're so happy that you support us on Patreon. And we have received a number of questions. And the first one is from Sudin, who is a supporter on Patreon, who wrote, I'm from India, pursuing masters in psychology. I like to study psychoanalysis deeply. Can you suggest any books or courses? Also, can you provide a brief guidance on how to proceed from a beginner's level? And as you pointed out before, Nicholas, there is, we actually posted a video on reading recommendations a couple of weeks ago, and I will post this in the chat for all of you to watch this later. We also have a Google document where we have listed all of these reading recommendations, and we will continue to add different kinds of recommendations to this list as time goes by. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. I will post it in the chat now. Oh, look, Sudin is here. He wrote in the chat, hi, from India.
Hello.
Okay, I will post it in the chat. But I don't know, do you guys have any other something else that you want to say regarding this question?
I know that India probably has 3 times as many people as Europe, and it's difficult to generalize, but there are psychoanalytic study groups and psychoanalytic societies there, and it is one of the places, together with China, for instance, and Iran and Korea, where psychoanalysis is booming. So many colleagues and resources certainly can be discovered there.
But I think it's an interesting, I don't know exactly about this person, you know, your background and such, but I think also the question from, let's say one gets interested in psychoanalysis, start to search online, find some videos from Berlin Psychoanalytic or others, start to get into this, and slowly this idea starts to come to life that maybe this is something I want to spend more time with and research, and maybe even become an analyst one day, you know, I'm just to think about that journey, how that could look, or, you know, what steps are involved in order to become a psychoanalyst. Is it something that we feel like we covered well enough, or should we add something to that?
There is this provide a brief guidance on how to proceed from a beginner level. I was reading it also as, what if you are a psychoanalyst? Because as Alexander points out, I think it's important to know that in India, it must not be that difficult if you are doing a master's level in psychology to find people already working with psychoanalysis, being them in an association, but probably, and even literature that is produced there in different languages, I suppose, as well. But I was reading it as a question of, like, what if you are already a psychoanalyst? How do you proceed in psychoanalysis once you are a psychoanalyst from this beginner level? Because when you are a psychoanalyst, you're a beginner psychoanalyst. And there is this obvious answer of, well, by doing it, no? By practicing and by being supervised, etc. But also, I was thinking of the more formal things. The fact that associations and institutes of psychoanalysis have more experienced psychoanalysts that have a particular function within most of the institutes that I know, which are like this didactic analysis, which is a different kind of analysis. I mean, I don't know how different in the day-to-day, I don't think too much, but it has a different status. The fact that an analyst in a certain institute is being analyzed is part of the training, but also the analyst who does it is probably an analyst that is there because of a certain reason of what we consider not a beginner level. Do you think the same? It's the same experience for you?
After several years, I don't know how many in each institute, you have to present your clinical work or sometimes a theoretical paper, and then the elderly, so to say, vote whether you can become a training analyst or a training and supervising analyst. It is, I think, 5 or 7 years. So it should show that you have worked all the time, had people in psychoanalysis and so on. It should show that you are not a beginner anymore.
Is there anything like this in like more formal union analysis? Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. I think I'm still a little bit stuck on my own question, maybe, because I think I take as a starting point the person who has no background, who's just just discovered psychoanalysis and sort of thinking about, yeah, this is something I want to go deeper into. Maybe this is something I would even want to practice one day. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I almost think so, that it would be a good start to go into analysis, if you haven't already.
Yeah, of course.
Just as a starting point to experience that, because I think reading psychoanalysis and engaging in it on that level, it can be fascinating and intellectually stimulating and probably life-changing in one way, but to go into the experience of a psychoanalytic process, I mean, I guess that would be a starting point in a way, in order to see and experience this, so to speak, live with your own material.
I agree completely.
Okay, so maybe let's jump to the next question. This question is from Hanan, who is also a supporter on Patreon. I'm wondering, what books, courses would you recommend for people who have a solid foundation about psychoanalysis as a treatment for mental disorders, but are more interested in psychoanalysis as a philosophical view of the world?
I wrote something there in the where we have our questions written.
Yes.
And I want to repeat what it says at the beginning, that thing that I wrote, which is, nice question. I like it. I don't know if a fan, but I think there are certain texts in philosophy and especially particularly that philosophy that deals with like more sociological aspects as well, that I think are pretty good, and I like them a lot. More postmodern philosophy, like the Anti-Oedipus, for example, of Deleuze and Guattari. I don't know well how to pronounce it. And Eros and Civilization by Herbert Marcuse, who's part of the critical theory, the Frankfurt School kind of people who do an analysis of thinking as product of the social context a little bit. And all with it's all very left-wing in terms of politics, but with the idea of how is capitalism molding our ways of being, among that, our minds, and how psychoanalysis seems to be a very, very good analogy, if you want, or theoretical standpoint from which to jump to these things. I think the concept of the unconscious that was popularized by Freud and made into a working discipline was not something that philosophers could now write as if that concept didn't exist anymore. So I think all philosophy from Freud ahead has changed because of the presence of that idea. But in person, I would like to just recommend those two books to you because I like them very much, and because they take this knowledge that you have already about Freud and psychoanalysis, and they use it in order to explain certain things about thinking and epistemology and the social condition, the human condition, even ontology, because of those concepts, the Oedipus complex, the desire, etc. Also, the fact that Jacques Lacan wrote, and more than wrote, taught the way he taught and talked the way he talked, and took language so seriously, also gives philosophy a super rich, let's say, field of analogies, and it allows them to explain things in a different way, in the way that we relate to language. It's very important for philosophers as well. So I would say that I would recommend those two, but I think that every philosophy now that deals with the human condition has to include psychoanalysis somehow, even if it's not directly citing it. What do you guys think?
I'm sure about Frankfurt, many people would benefit from Adorno or even Erich Fromm. And I would just like to add two names from, so to say, from Paris. And one is Julia Kristeva, and the other one is Paul Ricoeur, who have written so much about psychoanalysis from the philosophical point of view, or the interchange, that I believe is useful for us as psychoanalysts very much.
Well, wasn't also psychoanalysis Freud's philosophy of life? I mean, if we read Freud, we have to, it's not only about clinical work, no, I mean, a civilization and its discontent, or Moses and monotheism, or totem and taboo, or you name it, in a sense. There's so much in the archives, just starting from there, that I think I could almost not read Freud without sort of also reading philosophy, or reading about him sort of philosophizing over the human condition. So I think there's a lot in the original sources. And since I'm a Jungian, you know, Jung was also keen on looking at culture in different ways and trying to understand, you know, the collective, not only the individual, but especially the individual in relationship to the collective. And I think there's one very topical or timely essay that he wrote that's called Bhutan, that is Jung trying to understand what happened during National Socialism. And that essay was also very criticized, because, you know, sort of looking at trying to psychologize maybe too much, you know, very complex phenomena that were going on. And Jung also not having a clear standpoint, or taking a strong enough standpoint against National Socialism in that time. But still, the essay in itself is an interesting attempt of Jung of trying to understand cultural forces that I think maybe are also active in the collective today, as we're experiencing war again in Europe. There's another book by Jung that he wrote at the end of his life that is also dealing with the matters of the individual and the individual psyche in relationship to collective forces, and that's called The Undiscovered Self. It was a few years before he died, he wrote it, and it's sort of also one of his final pieces. And that's really I think he presenting a philosophy of life, and, you know, why is the work of analysis important, you know, given, you know, how the world is sort of challenged, and the individual, you know, psyche's relationship to the collective. So these are just some sources, but maybe we can fill up with some more later as well in the chat.
Yeah, another important name came to my mind, that is Donna Orange, a contemporary American, so to say, phenomenological psychoanalyst, who has a PhD in philosophy and only then turned to psychology and psychoanalysis. And her work is extremely important She's published several books over the last 10 years that are very important when it comes to how we care about ourselves, how we care about other people, how we listen to other people, and so on and so on. So that's another idea that came to my mind. Donna Orange.
Okay, great. Let's continue with the next question. Catherine, who is also a supporter on Patreon, she wants to know if you like Lacan, Alexander.
I love this question.
Yes.
I of course have never met Lacan, so I don't know whether I would like him. I would have liked him. I assume I wouldn't, because from what I've seen of the recordings, there's so much theatricality and so much narcissism around it that I somehow don't watch this very gladly. When it comes to Lacanian theory, which I assume the question is actually about, I would like to say, first of all, I find it strange that in psychoanalysis we follow one author as a totem, and we are Freudians, Lacanians, Kleinians, whatever. I find that completely unnatural. I understand that people have favorite pianists or favorite poets and so on, but in a profession that is partly focused on helping patients and partly focused on becoming a science, none of this helps. Following one author in our attempts to help each and every patient, I think, is completely ridiculous, because people need different things. And also, many of these people, Lacan included, died several decades ago. The world has changed, the questions have changed, the problems have changed, some of the answers have changed. When it comes to Lacan individually, I find what I know of him to be an avalanche of words. There are so many words that sound very well. He seems to me like rather masterful in self-advertising, so to say. The unconscious is structured as a language. The unconscious doesn't have ears and such stuff. Sounds very interesting. I have no idea what it rests on, what kind of a clinical, scientific, or whatever tests, valuation, confirmation, or whatever this rests on. And then, most importantly, I have never met anyone who managed to show me, describe to me, what clinical use is there. And I don't think it fits my clinical experience. For instance, I have no idea who promised Lacan or whoever that the unconscious is structured in any way. Do we have any sort of evidence, soft or scientific or whatever, that the unconscious is structured in any way? This is, in my opinion, the opposite approach to what we discussed 5 minutes earlier. We discussed how psychoanalysis and philosophy and what could be the books that are useful there. Lacan claims that he returns to Freud. And in my impression, what he does actually is that he returns to Heidegger, and that he reads the late Heidegger and his papers and his obsession with language, German Romantic poetry, the man is being spoken, but the language speaks, and so on, and then pushes this into psychoanalysis and tries to found a philosophical psychoanalysis, which is quite fine, and some people certainly are very curious about it. I just don't see how that will help patients. But many other people disagree with me, and I'm totally happy about that.
In short, the answer is no.
In short, the answer is doesn't matter. I mean, on the one hand, I think we should learn from everyone in the world of psychoanalysis and focus on the patients first and foremost, listen to our patients far more than to our favorite authors. And second, I think Lacan and his theory have already fulfilled, I mean, reached their goal, and that is that everyone talks about Lacan.
I see.
So I'm not important there.
What is, I was thinking of the first part of the answer. I don't know how long do we have to stay in one topic.
You can comment and then we'll continue maybe.
Of this tendency of psychoanalysts or the history, or, I don't know, this way of grouping that they have that is based on authors, basically. And how this has brought about all these like more parts of the history of psychoanalysis that are in a way kind of important, but also in a bit they shouldn't have happened, let's say, if you wanted to be a science, like the controversial discussions between Anna Freud and Klein about who's got the better explanation kind of thing. And I was thinking, who are these people that I mean, it's Lacan, obviously, that we were talking, Klein, Freud, Winnicott as in the middle. Who else could you add at that level? Like
Bion, now more.
Bion would say he's a Kleinian, you know?
I'm not sure about that. Kleinians would say that Bion is a Kleinian.
Uh-huh.
Bion became actually a prolific author and a creative thinker after Melanie Klein's death and when he left London for California and Brazil. This could be a coincidence, but we don't know. There's Stephen Mitchell more and more in the United States. There is Laplanche more and more. Then there are the Italians, Ferro and Civitarese. There is Ferenczi. Posthumously, he was not as powerful a source at that time, but he is now.
And what do you think makes, what is common about all these people?
Wait a second.
Okay.
Didn't we miss someone?
I'm sorry?
Didn't we miss someone?
I mean, we certainly have missed many.
We didn't miss the Swiss man who was...
Yeah, of course, Jung and Anna Freud we didn't mention, and there must be many of them, yes.
It's important, yeah.
My question was, what do you think is common to all these authors? That they have a good idea, or is something about the way of structuring the idea? Is Klein someone that changes the way that we think about psychoanalysis as a method and a metaphor and a theoretical explanation, because she adds not only one element to it, but changes the way of seeing it? They offer a new method in a way?
I mean, if the question is for me, I think
for anyone,
most of these people had a very intense desire to be powerful, to be seen as charismatic, to be seen as changing the history, and worked like politicians or like Savonarola, if you will, on establishing these cults. For instance, we didn't mention either Faber or Bowlby, who both had nothing to do with this. Lived their lives, did their research, treated their patients, were never part of these fights. And we know what happened to the two of them while they were alive. I think there is obviously creativity, intelligence, and such stuff, and they have changed something about how we see the world of psychoanalysis now. But there is this desire to establish themselves as a cult figure. Again, I may be wrong. I've never met any one of them. Just I believe there are historical documents that show this.
Okay. Anything else that you guys want to say, or can we continue?
Continue.
Okay. So the next question is also from Catherine. Do you think there is a minimum length of analysis one should undergo oneself before committing to training?
Well, and there are some institutes that actually ask you for a minimum to study. There are others that don't. So a part of what we could recommend now in the rest of the answer, there are some institutes that actually make this question that you asked, Catherine. They resolve it for you because they tell you how much do you need. Then after that, I don't know, do you have any comments on this? Would you recommend a length of analysis before starting to study to be an analyst?
Well, can you say that in Zurich, for example, you need to have 50 sessions with an analyst who is within the IAAP before applying to training? And I think it's necessary to have had an experience of analysis. How long it should be exactly, I don't know.
I remember having heard about this, but I cannot tell you what the purpose of this should be. That one should know what it looks like, and then if you want to change your mind, change it before you start the training, or what do you guys think is the purpose of this?
I think that it is to have the experience, of course, because if you read psychoanalysis, even if you read what is published of sessions, they are one session among so many sessions in one moment sometimes. I mean, you're not going to read a full analysis. There are some read, but no one's going to do that. You need to see what this is about. And the thing is, like, of course, you not only get the experience of analysis, you get the experience of a certain analyst, which it's also a thing. I mean, the ideal would be to do a little bit of shopping, but then again, especially if you have a reason why you think that going to psychoanalysis or psychotherapy might be good for you, then start with that, and then you see if you'd like to do what you're experiencing, of course.
Okay. So the third question from Catherine is, I thought I saw a comment during a previous Q&A, it was the AMA that we did a couple of years ago, to do with greater efficacy of psychoanalysis if one is in it for 18 months minimum. In cases of childhood trauma and adult attachment, would there be an advisable duration, or does it just ultimately depend on the patient case?
Okay, of that question, when it says, does it just ultimately
depend on the patient or case?
That's a bit of a dodgy part of the question, because in outcomes in general of not only psychoanalysis, but psychotherapy in general, it just don't only depend on any one thing. So everything that we might say now, you have to take it with that pinch of salt that we're just explaining one of the many ways that we don't know them all of why psychoanalysis or psychotherapy works. And one of them is length. What I know is that in terms of what has been done with empirical research about this, and empirical research take into account that counts that psychoanalysis works when the problem is not there anymore. So when you don't have symptoms anymore. When psychoanalysis might be, of course, is a way of treating symptoms. In many ways as well, it might be longer than that, because other things continue that doesn't necessarily count as symptoms in empirical research, which get their symptoms from the DSM and other psychiatric kind of ways, classifications. Okay, so yes, psychoanalysis, if it's longer, seems to work better. But that advantage in getting rid of symptoms is just slightly better for the longer analysis. So the question remains of if it's cost beneficial, and not only talking about money here, but it's a lot of time that a patient might invest in this. So is it good or bad? It's a question of where are you asking this from? If you are a government and you have a public system of health, how is better? What is better? If it's shorter or if it's a bit more profound, are you going to pay for that little bit, for example? I think the suggestion that you do that it depends on the patient and case is very important as well. It's not the only one either, but it is important that different patients are going to react differently, depending not only on their problem, but in the way that that patient is and the way that the treatment takes place, etc. That's with respect to the duration of psychoanalysis. Then there are two opposing groups here in empirical research about psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. One that says that it doesn't do any different, and another says that it makes a difference. So, and there is good evidence in both sides. So what is established right now is that there is a difference. It's better if it's longer, but not that much better. It's not a big difference. It's not that your analysis is double the time. You're going to be double as well, double better.
I would just like to say, it seems to me once the treatment has started, and let's say it's 2 years into the analysis, it is not going to depend on whether the analyst and the patient together, whether they think this can improve and that cannot improve, and they make a rational plan. I think it's the issue of separation then. Separation anxiety is the negotiation of how we separate, where it hurts, for how long it hurts, and so on. So I wouldn't say, I understand researchers, of course, approach the problem rationally, but clinicians don't have the luxury to do that very often, I'm afraid.
Well, I would also just shortly speak from my experience as a clinician. You know, one of the few things that I say often quite clearly in the first meeting with the potential new patient is that this is a longer term process. And what I can say, what works in my experience of the people I met, what works is if you stick with it. And when I say stick with it, it needs a year or two and sometimes more to be really effective. That's where I see people really changing. That doesn't mean that you have to marry the process from the beginning, but it's important to set the expectation. And that's the only thing I can say clearly. Like the people where I see that type of change, it needs some time in that range.
Can I ask how long were your analysis? Is that like a personal question?
Oh, I wish I could tell you precisely. I was for a year and a half, 2 or 3 sessions a week, and then officially in training 4 sessions a week for 6 or 7 years. But it was long ago. I cannot now tell you exactly. I think around 1,100 sessions.
I don't know the exact number, but I know there's a number for how many sessions you have to do in order to finish the training in Zurich. And you're recommended at least to meet with 2 and work with 2 different analysts throughout the training, preferably also one of each of the different gender. But that's, this is, I cannot say exactly how many years it is, but it's been quite some.
Yeah, I did 3.5 years with between 3 and 4 sessions a week. And I say between because it would vary. And I don't, and I'm back now with my same analyst. Yeah.
Online?
So, online. We're doing not analysis anymore. Psychoanalytic psychotherapy, let's say, but not because of a symptom, but I thought because I'm working more with clients, and because of just wanted to get married and that kind of personal stuff. But just psychoanalytic psychotherapy, but it works pretty similarly in many ways.
I meant to ask you, does online make a difference for you? Because from the first session to the last week, I was on the couch all the time. And I cannot tell whether there is a difference.
I haven't systematically thought about that, but I was also in the couch since the my analyst decided that it was time to go to the couch. So it was like, I don't know, a month or a month and a half talking one-to-one in front of him, and then I didn't see him anymore, let's say, during the analysis time. And now, I don't know, actually. It does make a difference that it's just once a week, for example. That is a big difference. Before it was much more to the detail, to the day, to the etc. When you can continue sometimes sessions, and that in that way is quite different. I mean, I end a session with something that I want to explore about myself or my relationships, with an idea about something or with a relief about something. By the time I have the next session next week, it's very different of what I had pictured my next session would have been when I finished the previous session. I don't know if that was clear.
Yes,
many things happen. That it makes a big difference. That the fact that it's online, I think, well, I can see his face, let's say, but usually I'm kind of not doing that. Maybe because I had the experience of couch analysis before. So I just wonder, and I end up always looking at the same point like I used to do when I was there. And then at some point, of course, I'm going to ask myself, why am I looking at that point and not the point next to it, like in analysis? But I see that something happens with his face, that he can work with his face a bit more as well. So sometimes he doesn't have to say anything, but just go like, or etc. And you would get that he's kind of signaling something. But I'm going to think about this more. If it makes any difference to me as a patient. Also, as I tell you, it's not that I'm expecting to solve a certain kind of precise symptom that I have.
And if your analyst is watching us, he can write his comment in the chat.
Yeah, he could do. Hello.
Well, I mean, some of the feedback I get from patients as well, and also from colleagues and friends who are in analysis or therapies, of course, the ritual around the actual session, or going there, commuting, going back, that missing that, or how much that has been a part or becomes a part of the actual analytic process, everything around that, versus logging in and getting right into the session. I think that that is a radical difference that we all have to deal with in different ways.
Okay, so next question is from Helia on Instagram. She wants to know how to apply for a psychoanalytic training program, requirements, etc. And she also wonders if we offer a psychoanalytic training program. And we do not do this. We don't offer it, but we offer, as you know, the educational videos. And applying for a psychoanalytic training program, I guess that's a bit different when it comes to country. Maybe you could share your experiences from.
I assume it is rather similar with possibly some specificities. One must be a psychologist or a psychiatrist In some countries, a social worker. In the United States, a PhD nurse also accepted, and should preferably have some clinical experience. If not, these things have to be compensated for, so to say. One must, during the training, take some psychology courses or do an internship at the psychiatric hospital or some other sort of mental health institution. Other than that, I'm not aware of any other requirements.
That's
Are
it.
there? Mm-hmm.
I think that's it. People who do not have these requirements, especially when it comes to degrees, that changes a little bit country to country. But for example, in Chile, you could study it in an institute, but you don't see patients.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can study. Yeah.
There are these options at various places to have a training to be something like a researcher or an author, but not a clinical part of the training.
It's similar in Zurich. I mean, you don't have to go to Zurich to train to be Jungian, but that's where I have my experience. It's similar, but with the difference that you can apply also with a master from other fields. You don't have to be a psychologist, trained psychologist to apply, although I would say that the majority are. And there's also this, you have to be 28, or if it's 27 years old, there's an age.
Okay.
And I know also there is, you have to write not a biography, but like, and not a motivation letter, but like an essay actually where you speak about yourself and what leads you to this decision.
Okay, that's
and
interesting.
then there's a committee or 3 people that are sort of with you through the whole training, and that are also evaluating the progress of your how they perceive it. And throughout the whole training, you can also you have to sort of meet with them and see if you can get to the next step. But that might be very different in other countries. And again, there's very good training programs also for Jungians in the UK, in London, and in Chicago, and also in New York and in other places.
Okay. So the next question is from Tobia Paminio Nicolo. Why is Silvio Fanti's micropsychoanalysis not a member of IPA? Or why is Silvio Fanti not a member of IPA?
I have never heard the name before.
I mean, has anyone of the others? No. Okay. Well. And the next question is from the same user on Instagram. And they like to know why Freud and Jung are more famous than Adler, or more popular, or yes.
Well, I'm not sure how to reply. There are Adlerian institutes. There is definitely one in Berlin. So his influence still exists. Why are the 2 other guys more popular? I don't know. They were possibly better in promoting themselves and gathering a group of followers or groups of followers.
Or they just had better ideas. Well, I'm not sure, but also why and how actually. But I think it has a lot to do with the followers and what you said before, Alexander, about organizing, sort of structuring, a movement of sorts. I mean, that's what's very telling when you read the letter exchange between Jung and Freud. Most of it is about politics and talking about other analysts. But there's also something about the relevance of ideas, and how they fit with the zeitgeist, of course. And some old prophets are awakened again, and there's new movements starting. So, and speaking of Jung, me speaking of Jung, he's always gone in and out of fashion. suddenly there's an interest, like now there's more interest, but then there are years where he's almost like persona non grata, and in the academic he's absolutely still not acceptable in any way. Almost.
Adler was the first psychoanalyst to publish a paper about what is called the death drive. And that was, I believe, in 1907. And Freud couldn't care less. And Adler then was kicked out for other reasons. And then 13 years later, there it is, Freud writes about the death drive, Adler nowhere mentioned. So there are various problems about that. But again, I would advocate the approach that we should filter and absorb the best of their ideas, test it against what is needed in our time, and go on. Scientific development, I mean, think of going to a dentist and he approaches your tooth from the Adlerian point of view. I assume every one of us would run away.
Okay.
Wait. I know, but maybe we're too slow.
Too slow?
Yeah. I mean,
in what sense?
Because I wanted to propose something branching out of that question, but it's too much. But just this sense of, again, following the same, this one author, classifying oneself, etc. And why is Freud or Jung more famous than Adler? Does it have to do with the patients again? Or with this drive that you comment, Alexander, on promoting themselves? Or do they write nicer? Or do this has to do with the if it's more efficacious to read for the patients to read Freud or Jung than to read Adler? What do you think about that? Because it talks a bit about the pretensions of truth or science of psychoanalysis.
I don't know, it's difficult for me to say. Psychoanalytic books globally sell several hundred copies at best. So there are no psychoanalysts now who are on bestseller lists, who, like Erich Fromm, can reach millions of people around the globe. So I don't really know. And this all happened like 100 years ago. I don't even know when Adler died. Freud died in 1939. I admire their questions. I'm not sure their answers are so relevant for our times. So I honestly don't know.
Yeah. It could be a long discussion, this one.
You know, Adler, as far as I can remember and understand, writes a lot about power. And then, is it possible that the power as a topic is now absorbed by the topic of narcissism and has disappeared in there, so that invisible Adler is with us all the time, but we're not aware of his name? I don't really know.
And his idea of power appears counter mainstream or let's say not Freudian, because it came to challenge sex, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Freud wouldn't allow anyone to touch the idea of the dominance of sex drive. And now we know he was not right about that.
Well, also, I mean, I haven't read much Adler, but how I understand power, I understand it in the context of freedom, how to live, how to become free, how to live, you know. I find, as I understand him, he's speaking about power and willpower, and he connects to Nietzsche, but it's really about, you know, how to live free, and also how to develop a philosophy of life to allow more freedom. So I find, you know, for me, it's just a constant relationship between these ideas and the collective, you know, how the collective develops. I mean, let's look at Jung. Why did he, when I started training, you know, more than 10 years ago, or it was 12 years ago, he was extremely out of fashion, to put it simple. He was in most places, and in Sweden, you couldn't even mention his name. And now, 12 years later, I mean, he's not on the front of the newspapers, but he's an accepted part of the collective discourse again. You can talk about him. Podcasters want to, research him. There are papers written. Again, not in the academia, but, outside of the academia or on YouTube or in the common discourse. And I find that so interesting, how these ideas continue to live, or other aspects of their work is emphasized, for example, and lift up again. And I find that's very rich, and to see how, because for me, that's a constant interplay between how a collective and the culture at large develops.
Okay, let's continue with the question that Sudin posted. I'd like to know your opinion on intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy developed by Devanlu.
I don't know anything about it.
It's a very specific question. I can tell you a little bit about it. It's a short-term therapy based on psychoanalysis and the ideas of defense mechanisms, and the fact that you develop symptomatic or just maladaptive strategies in order to deal with certain feelings that you don't want to know you have. This is kind of what takes of psychoanalysis. I'm doing this super fast. It's like in the treatment of phobia, this short-term psychodynamic psychotherapy, dynamic therapy, to psychoanalysis, the relationship between the two is the same of in cognitive psychotherapy for phobias, having progressive desensitization against shock therapy. So it accelerates things and needs people who can tolerate a lot of anxiety. And they head on goes, oh, so you are not feeling well saying this. So how are you? I'm awkward, but why? And it interrogates the defense a lot, and it's like very intense. And it works like many other psychoanalytic psychotherapies that there are. It happens that they get named by the person who kind of comes with this form to use psychoanalytic ideas or that other form. And then it seems like if they were different things. When we talk about CBT, it's also an illusion. I mean, there is 1,000 CBTs, no? With psychoanalysis also, we have 1,000 ways of utilizing these ideas, in which psychoanalysis is kind of the one that we know, the more classical. But psychoanalytic psychotherapy, there are many different kinds. And many of them, all of them work. And this is one of the ones that work. But it works for symptoms, so psychiatric symptoms. And they've got a lot of, it's pretty circumscribed in the sense that you wouldn't treat people with moderate to more difficult depression with that. You wouldn't treat psychosomatics with that. It's got anxiety and social problems or relational problems as where it works. So it's good. It's good that these ideas have been used in many different ways that might be useful for people. That's it. But it's the same opinion I would give you with most of the names you could tell me of different psychoanalytic psychotherapies. I would go to read a little bit about them, what is the rationale, and if there is any, in my case, I always go to, well, does this work? Empirical research or accounts of, or case studies, but a couple of them. And I would see if there are people who say that it works for them. So I'm glad that they're based in psychoanalysis, but you will find which one works for you as a therapist, I suppose, or because you are in contact with a certain group of people, or because you live in a certain place, or because you went to a certain university where the inventor of one of these therapies was working. But in the end, what is interesting would be to try to see why all this works, why all these different psychotherapies work. And this is included. It's not a conclusive answer we can give there, but they work, and there are thousands of therapies with names that work. That's my opinion on it.
Super. Okay. Salain Incognita on Instagram wants to hear some comments on the integration of psychoanalysis with psychiatric medication and your opinions on that.
Well, no psychiatrists here, no medical doctors here. I'm not sure we can say much.
What about your experience?
I've never been in medication either, so I don't have much experience.
But do you have patients or you've had patients that were also
Yes, that's true. That's true. I think reactions are completely different. I've seen people who benefited hugely from a minor dosage of antidepressants without any major side effects. And I've seen people who have suffered from various symptoms, headaches, somatic symptoms, and so on, from equally small dosage of antidepressants. So it's difficult for me to say. At the time when I worked in the psychiatric hospital, I think a benefit from medication was obvious sometimes. More often, I would say, with younger people than with chronic patients. But I was not able to understand then, and I cannot understand now, why medication is prescribed to such a large groups of people and for decades. And the last thing I want to say, but this is all impressions. This is nothing really serious. I was privileged to speak with Anne-Louise Silver several times over like 10 years. And she used to work at Chestnut Lodge for several decades before they used any medication and after they introduced medication. So at the time when they worked with psychotic patients with the use of psychoanalysis only and then in combination. And in her opinion, patients who are given medication and agree to it recover faster from their symptoms and can be discharged from the hospital, but in the long run will not develop a meaningful sense of life, creative expression, and so on. While people who undergo psychoanalytic treatments for psychosis, which can take years and be extremely complicated and so on, will, I mean, it's implicitly present in what I'm saying, will require a lot of time to improve, but their lives then will make much more sense. And the case of the novel I Never Promised You a Rose Garden is one that is very often used to illustrate this. But this should not be taken very seriously. These are just some impressions.
Jacob?
I don't have anything to add actually to this. I think, yeah, nothing specific to add to this.
I am of the opinion that if it works, it's good. Meaning that if the person feels better, it's good. Now, that might be taking a little bit like, a bit like short term, but better in the long term. So I consider that what Alexander says is perfect. But on the other hand, I know that there might be a certain resistance from taking the psychoanalytic theory, let's say, and saying, well, if the person cannot confront their symptoms because they've been relieved by a pill, can they ultimately change psychoanalytically? As if a proper psychoanalysis would be in contraindication with the use of something that is symptomatic, let's say. As you were saying, people stop taking a medication and they will relapse, or many of them might have higher odds of relapse. What do you think about that side of psychoanalytic theory, that if you don't have the suffering, then why would you be even motivated to do painful.
I mean, I think there's a truth to that, but I mean, not that truth, but I think there's definitely in individual cases, you know, in most cases, I would say, I mean, we need to confront suffering, but in some cases, and I also have experience of that, of course, antidepressant has been helpful because it's been too painful or too difficult to get out of bed or what it can be. So I find in sometimes, I'm generalizing, but I think sometimes in the Jungian discourse, at least, there's a negative view on antidepressants and this type of medication because it would somehow pamper down feelings or not giving access and such. I haven't experienced that much of that, although, I haven't experienced much of that in my processes, but I think often if the process goes well, that the antidepressants are also, you know, decreased or often, you know, something that sort of reveal that we can let go of throughout the process.
I think we should give medication to some people at some moments. It is probably for some people necessary, but ideally I think we should give them for a short time and introduce other measures that would make the person more independent. But then the same thing can be said about psychotherapy. Some people need psychotherapy, but maybe for a limited time, and then with the help of something else, their friends or whatever, they can become more independent than being in psychotherapy for 10 years or 25 years. The person to read about this, I believe, I'm not sure, I've never read books about medication, psychoanalysis, but I think the person to read about this is Glenn Gabbard.
Yeah, good recommendation.
Okay, so it's 5 o'clock. So we should wrap this up. There is another question in the comments. Don't know if you have time to answer that one. It's Sudin who wants to know, I'd like to ask one more question. In your opinion, is it possible to prove psychoanalytic concepts neurologically? Is there any such developments?
Well, there are great hopes and their attempts. Possibly, again, to recommend a source, possibly it's the journal Neuropsychoanalysis. And I mean, there must be other journals as well.
The Mind and the Inner World is a good book. And it's not complicated. By Mark Solms. Considered one of the pioneers of neuropsychoanalysis. It depends. I mean, what do you want to... It depends on the concept. I mean, there are many concepts which are no operationalization is already impossible.
I don't want to sound discouraging, but I have about a year ago started reading papers by Professor Thomas Fuchs, who is now the Karl Jaspers Professor of Philosophy of Psychiatry in Heidelberg. And they seem to me to put this discussion, brain, mind, and what we can hope from neuropsychological research or neuroscientific research to the best place I've seen so far. So that's another reading recommendation that I can make.
What's his name again?
Thomas Fuchs.
Okay.
Okay, so I suggest that we wrap it up. Anything? Thomas Fuchs, yeah, genau, that's. Is there anything else you would like to say or share today? Or
thank you for
you.
the questions and support and interest.
Yes, thank you so much for joining and for your support. We really, really appreciate it, and we look forward to creating more videos in the time to come, and hopefully engaging more live streams with you as well. But for now, Have a good weekend, and see you all soon.
See you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye-bye.